two men who have dedicated their lives to military service, to defending and protecting our country, found themselves on Capitol Hill today testifying. They found themselves there largely due to the actions of a defense secretary who, during his 10-month tenure as Secretary of Defense, has done little more than seemingly try to embarrass the men and women of the military. Navy Admiral Frank Bradley and Joint Chiefs Chairman Dan Kane were on the Hill today briefing Congress about that deadly double-tap boat strike in the Caribbean. Those meetings were held behind closed doors in front of a bipartisan group of lawmakers who have been demanding answers since the Washington Post story broke. They're demanding answers that Donald Trump's White House and Pete Hegseth have been evasive and reluctant to give, offering varying answers, shifting explanations in just about every news cycle since the first story last Thursday. Ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee, Congressman Jim Himes, telling reporters this after leaving that briefing.
What I saw in that room was one of the most troubling things I've seen in my time in public service. You have two individuals in clear distress, without any means of locomotion, with a destroyed vessel, who are killed by the United States. Under the DoD manual for abiding by the laws of armed conflict, the specific example given of an impermissible action is attacking a shipwreck. Any American who sees the video that I saw will see the United States military attacking shipwrecked sailors. People will someday see this video and they will see that that video shows, if you don't have the broader context, an attack on shipwrecked sailors.
Himes, after watching that video, also told reporters that the admiral confirmed that there had not been a kill them all order. That video of the second strike, which Congressman Himes refers to as one of the most troubling things he's ever seen in public service, that's what he said, has the Pentagon facing growing pressure to do what he implores there, to release the video to the American people, to the public. Donald Trump was asked about that yesterday, about releasing that second strike video. Watch what he said.
You released video of that first boat strike on September 2nd, but not the second video. Will you release video of that strike so that the American people can see for themselves what happened?
I don't know what they have, but whatever they have, we'd certainly release. No problem.
No problem. So that's Donald Trump agreeing and saying it's, quote, no problem to release with the lead Democrat on the House Intelligence Committee, who says this is the most disturbing thing he's ever seen in his career in public service. What he describes as sailors in clear distress, that's his quote, what he describes as an attack on shipwrecked sailors, something we have all learned now is forbidden in the DoD manual spelling out war conduct that is acceptable and legal. But all of this isn't even the only scandal that engulfs Pete Hegseth's Pentagon today, because a report by the DoD Inspector General is also out today, public, and it concludes that Pete Hegseth shared classified information in the now infamous Signalgate breach. The Atlantic writes that the Inspector General's conclusions seem likely to create an impression among the military rank and file that there are two sets of rules, one for the Defense Department's presidentially appointed leadership and one for everybody else. That is where we start today. Staff writer for The Atlantic, Nancy Youssef, is here. She covers national security and the Defense Department. Also joining us, former Deputy National Security Advisor to President Obama, Ben Rhodes, is here. And retired Rear Admiral Bill Baumgartner is back with us. He is the former commander of the 7th Coast Guard District and also served as Chief Counsel of the United States Coast Guard. He is now a member of the former Judge Advocates Generals, or JAGS, working group. Admiral, let me start with you. What do we know now that we didn't know last time we talked on Monday about that second strike?
Well, we don't know a whole lot more because actually we haven't seen the video. We now just have the description from more people that have seen the video. But it does still seem that we have shipwreck survivors. What's still the same is the whole premise behind the operation, which shouldn't have begun in the first place. This wasn't an armed conflict. We shouldn't have been operating under the laws of armed conflict and striking vessels, particularly with no warning, no opportunity to surrender, and so forth. and it's not the real threat that we're seeing from drugs, which is fentanyl. So those things really haven't changed. We didn't have the right campaign to begin with. And when you start a campaign of lethal force on a bad premise with bad legal justification, you end up with bad decisions as you go down the line. And trying to apply the laws and rules of engagement that you would normally apply to a terrorist with an RPG or some type of a weapon shooting at you to two survivors clinging to wreckage of a drug boat doesn't end up well. And I think that we've got confirmation that it doesn't end up well and it doesn't look good.
Admiral, we have focused perhaps disproportionately on the Trump administration's response to the initial story that thrust this into public view. But I want to try to train our eye back on the act, because that is what the videotape will illustrate. And I think you first brought our attention to the text of the DOD manual that spells out why this is illegal, why Republicans were some of the loudest voices calling this a potential war crime. So let me just read this. Quote, clearly illegal, this is from the DOD manual, clearly illegal orders to commit law of war violations. The requirement to refuse to comply with orders to commit law of war violations applies to orders to perform conduct that is clearly illegal, or orders that the subordinate knows, in fact, are illegal. For example, orders to fire upon the shipwrecked would be clearly illegal. Now, the act, which is that after the first strike and the missile that the Post describes as launching from or over Trinidad, striking the boat, engulfing it in flames, left 2 survivors, doesn't seem to be in dispute.
No,
Congressman Hunt, right? I mean, I just want to establish what we know to be true. There's nothing that anyone said who emerged today that disputes the fact of what happened in the water. Is that right?
That's right. There's 2 survivors in the water. They don't have any weapons. They're clinging for life. They're trying to save themselves. And that's where we're at. That's what a shipwrecked person is. Again, we haven't seen the video ourselves, but that's the description that we have.
And let me just play what Republican Mike Turner said made him believe that that second strike was illegal.
Obviously, if that occurred, that would be very serious, and I agree that would be an illegal act. That is not the legal opinion or the information or the legal justification. The acts that have been described to Congress that are being undertaken in this, there are very serious concerns in Congress about the attacks on the so-called drug boats down in the Caribbean and the Pacific, and the legal justification that's been provided.
And just indulge me, let me show you one more Republican. This is Senator Rand Paul.
To my mind, there's a question about whether or not killing people in the first place, who you have no proof that they're armed, you have presented no proof that they're carrying drugs, and that you simply kill them. I think that's outrageous. But now, not only do we kill them, our government is following up by killing them when they're wounded and stranded and of no threat whatsoever, which is, according to our own laws, illegal.
And I just want to establish nothing we've heard from the people who were eyewitnesses in this briefing who watched the video contradicts any of those legal concerns voiced by Republicans, does it?
No, it doesn't. I haven't heard anything, and I haven't seen anything here that contradicts those very serious concerns.
So let me bring you in on this, Ben Rhodes, because I imagine we're going to, if we've sort of been in a spin cycle, it's going to go into hyperdrive now. You've got folks like Tom Cotton sort of lining up as defenders of whatever they saw, but you have now Democrats and Republicans coming out with very different reactions to the briefing. When going in, they were very much on the same page. What do you make of what's happened and what we know of what was seen today?
Well, I think that they know they're in trouble. I think you saw Trump a few days ago kind of pass the buck down to Pete Hegseth. You saw Pete Hegseth kind of pass the buck down to the commander, who then briefed this to Congress. And they can spin whatever they want. There's a very established fact of a video that shows what happened. And you can't spin the existence of a video. And by the way, these types of strikes are very well documented. I'm sure there's a paper trail. I'm sure there's communications. I'm sure there's perhaps even multiple videos for this kind of thing. And the reality is, to echo something the Admiral said, like, look, this is the definition of why they have laws of war, so that people who are in duress, people who are wounded, people who can pose literally no threat whatsoever. I mean, there's no spin that can describe how people hanging on to a burning boat posed a threat to U.S. military forces whatsoever. That's physically impossible, right? And so for them to spin this, I don't know. They can talk all they want about the drugs that are on the boat, if that's the case, but that doesn't justify taking this strike against people that were clearly in duress. This is why we have those laws. Frankly, we have them in part because of humanitarian purposes, in part because we want our own troops, when they're in harm's way, to have the capacity to surrender without being killed while they're trying to do so. And also, they've yet to describe a legal basis for the entire operation. And I want to say one more thing about that. If we accept the premise that Donald Trump can decide to kill people hundreds of miles away from the United States, even if there are drugs on those boats, and they're not providing a lot of evidence to back that up, even if there are, because somehow those drugs might reach the United States and might pose a threat to us, imagine how much that opens up the aperture for who he could kill and take military force against, based on the presumption that somehow they might someday pose a threat because the drugs might sometime get here, right? I think we're in very dangerous territory, and this is a time where Congress needs to reassert itself in the war powers, because right now Donald Trump is doing something that I can't think of any precedent for.